My name is Doreen Marie Johnson. My role in the community is that I'm the Director of Land and Natural Resources. I went to university at the Saskatchewan Indian Federated College and I graduated from the Indian Social Work program in 1988. When I first went to Saskatchewan Indian Federated College, I didn't have any idea about the Indian history or anything like that. Um, when I did go there in 1984, that's when I started. We took a lot of Indian studies programs and um, a lot of other things too, along with the Bachelor of Social Work degree. We did a 6-week cultural camp there where we had to go and stay there for a couple of weeks and just be there. So I tried to participate in as much stuff as I could, and one of them being the sweat lodge. I would go there as often as I could and cook and do all that kind of stuff. And the only thing I found with them is that they put us, like, they pigeonholed us, like females would have to stay at the camp and cook and sew and do those kind of things, and the guys got to go out and hunt and all that. And I thought that was pretty weird because we should have been able to do that too. Uh, what it did for me, though, in the end, and I've made this well known everywhere that I've gone, is that it made me really angry inside, and it made me angry because I didn't really understand before I went there about colonialism and racism. Being in Saskatchewan, I found them to be really racist people over there. And I loved Saskatoon when we were living there. And I would have stayed there. I would have preferred to stay there if I could have gotten a job. But I couldn't get a job. When I thought, well, it was because I was First Nations. And they didn't have very good white First Nation relations in that province, and I don't think that they still do. Mm-hmm. But how it did help me was that it was very easy to get a job because at that time, around the late 80s, they were talking about the 60s scoop and they were talking about child welfare a lot, and they were having a lot of difficulty to get First Nations into child welfare. So we got a job rather easy, but I got a job in Alberta, and that's where I went. And the first day on the job there, I remember my supervisor walking in and saying, you've all got your bachelors of social work degrees, and I want you to know that in this field you can throw everything out that you just learned because this is a whole new ball of wax, which it was. But I loved it. I loved that child protection, and I've been in it for 40 years, and I'm glad that I started in Alberta with child welfare because they were way much more progressive in that area than they were in other parts of the country. So I learned a lot there, and when I moved back to British Columbia in the mid 90s to work with our own people here, I already knew a whole lot, and the Child Welfare Act in British Columbia was so archaic, so I was kind of ahead of my time there. And just then, in 1994, they started trying to change the Child Welfare Act. Mm-hmm. So it was a good way. I went into child welfare and I stayed in child welfare. I'm not a counselor. I never could be because of my personality and so that's kind of where I've been all my life.
Mm-hmm. And what types of projects have you been able to do because of the education you've had?
The biggest thing that I've done is I did plan and develop and design and initiate and implement 4 delegated agencies. And I worked at the one in Williams Lake through FNUC and Work Society for 12 years. I was the executive director there, and so learned a lot about child welfare and that kind of stuff. So it's been my area of expertise, and I started my own company doing consulting on child welfare and helping the delegated agencies get their requirements for delegation. And we started the Indian delegated social workers training. So I've done quite a bit of stuff.
Anything more recent?
Uh, what have I done that's been more recent? Oh, more recently, our nation, the Shuswap Nation, which I'm a member of, um, where we were looking at trying to initiate and implement jurisdiction and authority over our own child welfare as a nation. So I worked on this Chmamel project for 4 years, and now I may have an opportunity to go back and kind of see it to fruition, I hope. When I hear that term, I have to go back to talk a little bit about my history, not in great detail, but just to let your audience know that I spent 10 years in residential school. I left here, Alki Lake, when I was 6 years old and not knowing any English. And I got over there in St. Joseph's Mission, just outside Williams Lake. And I spent 10 years there. It was a Catholic school. It was run by Catholics. So when I got there, I had to learn English. And I know English so well because I had to learn it from books. Um, and then we learned everything about being a good Catholic and that kind of stuff. We never learned anything about First Nations. Anything that we did hear about First Nations was always negative. That we were never good enough, we were never going to amount to anything, all that kind of stuff. Um, so then moving, and I was uh, one of the ones that went into when they first started integrating us into the white school. I spent 9 years not even seeing a white person around or a white student around the St. Joseph's Mission, and then all of a sudden to be thrown into a great big high school where they're all white kids, and then we got the racism, and that was the very first time that I experienced what true racism was. Being called a squaw, and there were people who were laughing at my clothes because at the mission we only had like a couple of sets of clothes and we wore them all the time. So they were, jostling me about that kind of stuff. So that's where I came from, and then going to university at the Saskatchewan Indian Federated College and learning again about the history of our people, and it was a whole different slant on it. And then so what I'm thinking about now is when I think of Indigenous education is that I think it's really critical for our kids to be learning from a young age about colonialism and about our history and about how much we've contributed to this society and how much society has taken some of the things that were First Nation things, like the rubber ball and used it to their advantage and then claimed it and then making our kids feel like that we are just leeches on white society, which we aren't. So I think if we could do that, it would really help with self-esteem and our kids moving forward. But it won't only help us; it would help the non-native people to understand that no, we're not leeches. We've paid our dues, and that kind of stuff, and we need to move forward. What I would like to see happen is, that we chuck out all the history books that we have now that's in our schools, and they're still in our schools all over the place, talking about, Columbus came and discovered Canada and all that kind of stuff. And we all know, well, if he discovered Canada, where were we? We were here already. We need to put that out and start from the beginning, the beginning story, and say that we were here and these were the things that we did when we were here. We had our own language, culture, traditions, organizations, societies, healers, everything we had here. And we need that to be known, and we need our kids to be proud of it. And I think the more that we can teach about that, then our kids would have a better chance, to be really successful. Is what I think. I think most of it is, we're shame based all the time and have been from my childhood anyway. My mother was First Nations and she was Shuswap, and my father is non-native. But I was custom adopted by my great aunt and uncle, and they raised me in a traditional way. We lived just down the road here in a little log cabin, and my dad hunted and trapped, and my mom was a very traditional woman. She sewed buckskin gloves and coats and that kind of stuff, and a really good seamstress. So that was kind of how I grew up, and I thank God every day that I had a really good life with my adoptive parents. So I know the language, I can speak it, I can understand it. To a certain degree. Some of the deep Shuswap I don't know. So, for our kids now that are in our school, if we could teach them, all of those things, and you move away from being ashamed of being First Nations, because you hear all these negative things. So we need some positive things, and I think that's why we're dying for role models now. And I think that's why I work so hard in child welfare is to be a role model, for our kids, and to have them saying, if she can do it, then we can do it too. What I would give them is to never give up, and don't let people think that make you think that you can't do it. You have to give it your best shot and just go for it. Um, you know, we have lots of barriers, throughout our lives. I've lived anyway. When I say we, I mean Indian people in general. But I've lived my life with barriers, growing up on this reserve with blonde hair and green eyes. It wasn't a good experience for me, but I think because my adoptive parents loved me so much, I had that good basis. So you go through, kids and adults, saying, you're a white child, and I was always called names, and one of them was Samield, which in our language means you're a little white child. And so you go through all of that. You have to work through it and get through it, and just not let it bother you, and just work to the best that you can. And don't give up. You got to find people that will stand with you, that will help you. And then you have to in turn teach your kids. When I was raising my kids, I every day or every week or as often as I could, I would tell them, you're going to university. You're going to university. I wouldn't let them get away from, thinking that they weren't going to go. And so I'm really proud that my daughters, I have two daughters, have gone to university, and I'm not so upset that my boys didn't go, my two boys, because my oldest son is doing okay. He has his own business, and my second son is a justice worker now, and is starting to realize that education is important because he's taking courses to better himself. So don't give up. Don't. don't do it because we need them, And the other part of it is that we're supported to go to university by our bands, by our home communities, but we're not supported to come home and work for our communities because they say they can't afford us. And maybe that's true, so we end up working out. But I think working out too out of community is a good thing because we learn about, how an organization works. We learn about, policies, procedures, and all that, and the law. And then when we come back home, then we can apply some of those things that we've learned out there over here. And not only that, I think when the First Nations people of a long time ago wanted the First Nations to be educated, I think that was the idea, was you get in there and you learn about what they do in their organizations because that'll give us the skills and the strength to fight them with their own tools. I would say to a new social worker is give it a chance. Give it a good 3 month period to work in child protection or in any social worker field that you're going to go in. Give it a good 3 months because it is a scary field. We're dealing with humans, with children, and we don't want to hurt them. We don't want to, make it so that we're repeating the cycle of systemic abuse. Um, the other thing I would like to say to them is that give everyone a chance. Everybody deserves a second chance. When I started social work, I didn't like to read files because it's all judgmental and labeling and all that kind of stuff. I like to get out and meet the person and talk with the person and ask them about, why are we still involved in their life? I see you've had 5 years of social workers that have been involved with your life. What is it? What is it that's going on that we're not making it better or we're not helping you? Because we go into social work to be helpers, and sometimes we don't do such a good job. And then also to listen a lot about culture and don't be judgmental about that. I've been in homes where it's the poverty is horrendous. You can see in the and the children are not well dressed, or maybe they can't even afford jackets or anything like that. So you need to find out. You need a coat. Well, let's get you one. And not say, well, why can't you get them a jacket? You blame the parent, blame the parent. Yeah, so for a new social worker, I think they need to just give it a good chance to and leave all of those labels and judgmental, you know, things at the door when you walk into somebody's home.